I'm Russ Heaps, and welcome to this episode of Beer to Whiskey. And in my ongoing quest to spread the gospel of good taste, today I find myself in Dayton, Ohio. This is a really different kind of brewery than we normally visit. This is a historic thing. It's actually part of a living museum here, and it's the Carillon Brewing Company. And just the quick thing, click thumbs up, like, watch for the round Beer to Whiskey icon, click on that to subscribe. And with that, sitting to my immediate left is Randy Porter. He's a fraternity brother of mine. We've known each other for 50 years. He has participated in several of these episodes. If you watch regularly, you recognize him, I'm sure. And he even managed to wear his team shirt, which I forgot to pack for this trip. And sitting next to him we have our two special guests. We've got Dan Lauro, and next to him, Kyle Spears. And they're sort of the brewers here at Carillon. We're going to talk a little bit about the beer. We're going to talk a little bit about the history, and there's lots of history to talk about, I guarantee you. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the beers that they're making and how they're making them, because believe it or not, we're sitting on the brewery floor here. This is not your usual stainless steel tanks and hoses and all that. This is done the way they used to do it back when beer was beer. So with that, guys, tell me a little bit about how this brewery came about.
Yeah, the brewery itself is part of a much larger historical park and organization called Dayton History. Dayton History is a privately funded nonprofit organization, and Carillon Historical Park sits on 65 acres. We have over 30 buildings, many of which are historic buildings that have been moved to the park to be interpreted and talked about, telling the history of Dayton. The brewery itself came up quite a few years ago in the master plan as an idea to kind of celebrate Dayton's history through a new lens, that of the rich brewing history that we did have here in Dayton, and we're kind of continuing to this day. And it is also a way to bring in a more consistent revenue stream for the nonprofit, bring in kind of a new demographic, but also have a steady income so that we can make future projects and future expansion possible for the organization.
So Dan, do you guys normally only brew on days when there are visitors coming in? I mean, it is obvious that, I mean, you guys aren't dressed to go partying, so it's...
No, we actually brew 4 or 5 days a week. The brewery itself is open 7 days a week to the public, as is the park. So what we try to do when we brew is we're trying to brew when people are here. Sundays and Mondays are kind of our cleanup days. But the rest of the time, we're working, we've got our fires going 9:30, 10. Our goal is to strike and be working from about noon, 1 o'clock through 6, 7 in the evening, so people can see us while they're in here eating, or if they're in the park and they're coming over to see what we're doing. And we make ourselves available to answer questions that they have at that same time. So,
Does it fall on you guys to sort of answer questions? Are people free to ask you guys questions and talk about the processes that you're doing?
Absolutely. Kyle and I are both historians by trade, brewers, but that's part of our job. Is not just make the beer, but interpret and answer those questions for people. Why are we doing it this way? What's different from today versus 160 years ago? So yeah, definitely.
That's the actual beer making period that you guys are sort of, I guess, bringing back, is about 160 years ago.
1850 is kind of our target year for Dayton. It's a unique year for Dayton, so it's kind of that time when Dayton is making that transition to an industrial city. You start seeing breweries popping up where people are looking more at production versus at home. Kyle was speaking about the buildings we have in the park. We have the oldest building in Dayton, which was a tavern, and at the point in time when that tavern was in operation, that would have been when they were making the beer there versus buying it from a production facility. So that is why we're looking at that period, because there's that change at that time.
Kyle, what got you started in brewing? How did you get?
Yeah, I mean, I've been a long-time craft beer fan. I had homebrewed a little bit when I was in college, but nothing on this scale, nothing on a professional basis. Like Dan said earlier, we both went to school for history. We have history degrees. Dan actually has a master's in history. I just have a lowly bachelor's degree. But long story short, I ended up at Dayton History at Carillon Historical Park about 7 years ago. Initially in the education department, and Dan and I still technically are in the education department for Dayton History. So we come at it from a museum background first and foremost. We just happen to be lucky enough to be associated with a museum that decided they wanted to open up a beer brewery. So craft beer hobbyist, historian by profession and academically, and I was lucky enough to be able to meet those things together and get paid for it. So it's pretty fun.
Did they come up to you and say, hey, do you want to do this? Or did they say, hey, we're going to do this? Do you know anybody who brews?
Yes, they announced the idea of it. That we got the funding for this being privately funded. The money came in, they went forward with the plan, so they started construction on the building, they designed it. They actually hired a woman named Tanya Brock, who had been at a museum in Indiana, in Muncie, Indiana. She had a background in historic food preservation. So they decided not to go with modern brewers on purpose because they didn't want a modern brewer to come in and try to make modern beer on old equipment. They really wanted people like a food preservationist, people with a history background, museum education backgrounds to really be able to do the research, which took about a year prior to the building being finished, which Tanya started and carried out. I came in on that about 6 months before the brewery opened full time. That's when I transitioned over to this project. They really wanted people that could do the research, kind of digest that research and put it into fruition, really bring it to life. So the decision was that historians or museum educators would be the right fit for that.
Yeah.
A modern brewer would still be starting off at square one, trying to figure out how to brew with fire and copper kettles and ferment in wood and everything like that. So historians, yeah.
Dan, how did you get reeled in?
I got lucky. That's one of those fortuitous crossing of paths. I was a home brewer for almost 20 years. My dad taught it to me, and then as I was working on my master's in school, I was actually looking at going towards kind of the college professor line, and I had one of those years where you had some financial, I had a car problem, I went through my savings, and I was like, well, I got 8 months left in my master's, I need a job, and I had a friend that was working here, and he's like, well, they have an opening at the brewery. So I came and I interviewed with Kyle, and it turns out it was for a brewer's position, and I'm like, okay, that's yes. And so, 2.5, 3 years later, I'm still here. And same thing, when I had homebrewed originally, when my dad had got me into it, and it was kind of one of those things where I'm doing it in the kitchen and I'm going, man, how could I do this for my job? And at that point in time, that wasn't clearly a path that was available.
Right.
So many years down the road to have that kind of meeting and that fall in my lap, and now I'm sitting here and I'm like, well, I get to use my history degree, I get to educate people, and I get to do something I love. So here I am.
Do you think the fact that it looks like you got sent over from Central Casting, you think that helped at all?
I have to say, full disclosure, when I hired him, that beard did not exist. So.
Yeah, actually, that's the funny.
The long hair was there, but not the beard. So
Yeah,
it's a good start.
This was that was originally I'm probably going to end up in a much more professional role. I'm going to have fun at least once, and then I'm here. So
yeah,
and apparently it fits.
It certainly does that. As home brewers, obviously having some sort of more up-to-date equipment, having a stove that you can cook on and that sort of thing. What kind of adaptation did you have to do with your home brewing skills to do what you're doing here?
I mean, if you look at our system back here, it looks crazy. It can be kind of chaotic and crazy, but when you break it down into its fundamental parts, it really is a gigantic homebrew setup. It's a 3-kettle system. We have a hot liquor tank, hot water tank, or kettle in our case, a mash tun that's not even directly heated. It's a copper kettle that's insulated with wood, so it's kind of like that big Gatorade, thermos that a lot of guys use for a mash tun at home. We have a boil kettle, we have a cooling coil, and we have fermenters. So the biggest difference is what those things are made out of. We've got copper kettles, mash tun that's surrounded by, or coopered, barreled by wood around it. A cooling coil that we actually pour the wort through the coil rather than submerge a coil filled with water into the kettle. And then our fermenters are American white oak barrel. Really the biggest difference is in the materials. And that's really true from historic brewing from the 1850s up to the most modern high-tech brewery. The fundamental steps of the process have never really changed. It's the equipment and the kind of sophistication of the brewer's knowledge, the scientific knowledge of what's actually going on during the brewing process that has evolved over time.
How much beer you guys make in a year?
Let's see, we're a 1.9 barrel system, so we're end result in a day is about 45 gallons of usable product. But I think last year we did 150 batches.
Yeah, so about 300 barrels a year is pretty typical for us. So we're pretty small scale, but it takes a lot of work to get a brew day going.
I would think so. It's
Yeah.
got to be a little more time consuming,
Right.
although I suspect the main principles of brewing still exist in terms of cleaning and
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
exactly.
doing all that stuff.
Right.
Dan, what was the first craft beer you ever drank? What made you
Oh,
go,
it was-
aha, I
it
like
was-
craft beer?
It was Stone. Yeah, I'm lucky in the fact that how I was raised and how I grew up, I was introduced to beer early on. So when I went to college, I didn't have the 30-can case of Milwaukee's Best experience. I was always the guy that was like, oh, give me a Heineken, give me this. And me and my friends went out to the local bottle shop at the time, and they had a tiny little wall of all these weird-looking beers, and here was this one with this giant gargoyle on it, and I'm like, well, that looks cool. And it was, it really was. It was kind of, holy cow, this is something really, really, really different, and I don't think I ever strayed from that. It was always those early years, looking at those different things, what's out there, what's coming around, and to this day, I'll enjoy anything at least once to see what's there. So
Your original experience was somewhat like the person that bets on a horse in a race by what the jockey's wearing, kind of thing. And it just lucky enough that it worked.
yeah, honestly, yeah.
Kyle, what did you do?
Mine probably was, I have two. One was Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. That one for me was kind of one of the first beers that actually had flavor, and it was relatively hoppy. My dad actually often had Harpoon IPA in the fridge, so I'd get a couple sips of that every once in a while, and that kind of got me. That was always in the back of my mind, and then kind of forgot about that for a while. Then Sierra Nevada came around, or I discovered Sierra Nevada, and it was good. The really kind of aha moment for me was when I graduated from college. Traveled to Europe and ended up in Switzerland and Germany, and found Schneider Weiss wheat beer, and that one to me was just like explosion of flavor. Didn't know that a beer could taste like clove and banana and things like that. So those two, Sierra Nevada and Schneider Weiss for me.
You guys brew, you said 4 or 5 times a week. How many hours a week are you guys putting in here? It would seem to me that it's got to be a lot.
When we first opened, we've been open since August of 2014, when it was just myself and Tanya Brock, our original head brewer. She has since moved on. I'm the current head brewer. The two of us were putting in probably 60 to 80 hours a week. It was just crazy. Then we eventually hired on a new guy. That helped things out a little bit. But once I took over the brewery, I knew one of the biggest challenges for us is keeping all of this stuff going.
Right.
It's very labor intensive, so I made sure that I was able to hire a few new guys that could take care of these things for me. So that's when Dan came on initially part-time, and then we transitioned him over to full-time, and then we decided to bring in another full-time person as well.
So part-time was like 40 hours a week, I'm guessing.
Yeah, it was, honestly, yeah. It was supposed to be like the 25, 30, and the thing is I would be more than willing to stay. Like, do you need me to come in early? Do you need me to stay late? I'm not going to leave till this is done. And it's still like that. I mean, theoretically we should be, 40 hour, but I don't think any of us gets out of here without doing like probably 50, 55 a week. But the flip side of that is, the old adage, if you're doing what you love, it's not
Sure.
work. So,
Yeah.
I don't have a problem with it. There are days that I leave and Kyle's like, you didn't leave till 9:30, and I'm like, no, I didn't really notice, but hey, everything's clean, everything's done, so,
Yeah, even with modern, it's just like a modern brewery. When the brewery closes, the beer doesn't stop fermenting. So there's always, everything's alive in here. We have beer fermenting all the time. We have a natural sourdough bread program as well. We have a wood-fired oven. We have a sourdough starter culture that began in 1985. It was first created, so it's been
Wow.
going for over 30 years. So if we let that thing die, then that's tragic. So there's always something that has to be done. We roast all of our own grain in-house. That's very labor intensive for us. So we can't just shut the brewery off and take a week off and not do anything.
Yeah.
I noticed you
It has to
heat
keep
with
going.
wood, which is the old traditional way
Right.
to ferment. How much wood do you go through in a week or a month or a year?
Probably go easily through about a quart a week,
Quart a week,
on a
okay.
full brew schedule. Like Dan said, if we're brewing 4 or 5 days a week, we easily go through about a quart a week. We typically bring in 2 quarts at a time and get 2 shipments a month. So
Now, does that create an issue with temperature control when you're heating with wood versus modern
yeah, it definitely
gas or
does.
whatever?
I mentioned that we have 65 acres on site here. We have a lot of wood that's on site, but most of it's fallen ash and wood trees that have died, so it's kind of wet, not unseasoned wood. We tried to brew with that for about the first year, and our brew days were upwards of 13 hours long, just because we couldn't get the kettles heated up fast enough.
Yeah.
In the years since, we've gotten a little smarter, and we bring in wood. We have wood suppliers that bring us wood, so now we have a really consistent source of ash wood, which is fine. It burns well. But it's more importantly, it's been seasoned well. So if we have well-seasoned wood, we can burn through a brew day, no pun intended, in about 7 hours, which isn't all that far off of what a modern brewery can do. So there's parts of the process that you just can't change or rush. But for us, the wood is the sole thing that can make a 7-hour brew day or turn it into a 13-hour.
And then you said you ferment in wood cask. All your beers are wood cask fermented. Okay.
Correct.
Now, are those brand new, or are they used, or both? Little of both. I mean, that.
They were originally purchased 5 years ago, brand new.
Okay.
They come out of California. They're intended for the wine industry, but at 59 gallons, they fit our system perfectly. And a wood fooder is a wood fooder. So they've been changed out, with the exception of the Berliner barrel. They've been changed out once when they were trying to take care of some souring issues and whatnot, and that was part of the growing pains of this brewery. Is no one's done this, learning how to do it. So as they stand now, they're all about 3 years old.
I think 2 or 3 years old right now.
And with the wood fodder, like Kyle was saying, it's a living thing. It's just important to take care of it. And if you take care of it, you're careful in your cleaning and your processes and flushing and stuff like that, they're indefinite. You can use them as long as they're there.
'Cause I was wondering if I would think the wood would impart a certain flavor to the beer that you wouldn't get out of a metal fermenter.
I think maybe when they're first brand new, but after 2 or 3 years of it, most of those wood sugars, most of those phenols and esters in that wood, they've long been drawn out. So.
Okay.
Yeah, first batch of a brand new barrel, you might get a little tannin quality out of it. With these American white oak barrels, you get some kind of vanilla flavor, but we've never really noticed a whole lot. And it was never intended. We don't ferment in wood to impart flavor. The wood barrel was all they had
That's okay.
historically.
Historically.
And there's a lot of evidence that shows that brewers, especially in England, for instance, hated the taste of wood in beer. So they did a lot of things like they pitched barrels on the inside with pine tar and wax and things like that to kind of protect the beer from the wood flavor. But in our experience with this, we don't really get a whole lot of flavor out of the wood.
Do you guys barrel age anything?
We don't. In my research, I never found a whole lot of evidence that they were throwing beer into other barrels. Dan might argue with me on that, but
Not in terms of like what we think of as barrel aging. It's usually accidental. Like, hey, because there's a thriving barrel trade. It's not like today where you get your kegs back when someone, I
Right.
send those kegs to America, or you send them there, and they're going to be there forever. So, what I usually found in my research was where someone was on the cheap buying old like wine barrels or port barrels, and maybe his first batch. So there was a really famous brewery, I think it was in Belgium, that was buying port barrels, and so his first batches out of those barrels were, flavored, but not like what we're thinking today in terms of that now.
Let's talk about the beers that Randy and I have in front of us.
sure.
What this is a sour of some kind.
It is. That's our Berliner Weisse. So Dan mentioned we have 5 white oak fermenters. 4 of those give off pretty clean flavors in terms of no Brettanomyces wild yeast or lactobacillus souring, with the exception of our Berliner barrel. So that's kind of our magic barrel that anything we put in there, it's going to spit out some sour flavors. With the Berliner Weisse, that's perfect because it was a historically popular beer from the mid-1800s, especially in Berlin, Germany. It was the preferred beer of Napoleon's troops, and it was known for its really tart, refreshing, almost champagne-like quality, to the point that but they referred to it as the champagne of the North. So it should be effervescent, it should be tart, it should be refreshing, almost like lemonade. And that tartness comes from a healthy lactobacillus culture. In our case, it's the culture that was just ambient in the air in this brewery. So that barrel, once it kind of started to take on that culture, it's still in the wood. Even after we flush that barrel very thoroughly with water, we can put a new batch of wort in there for the Berliner, pitch some controlled yeast in there to get the alcohol content up, and then that lacto soaked into the wood will still impart flavor on the beer. So that's our sole sour beer that we do at this point. If you had come to the brewery, Dan kind of touched on it earlier, about 2-3 years ago, we had a fairly pervasive souring issue with all the beers, where every beer that we brewed had some type of sour flavor associated with it. We've worked very diligently and hard to kind of mitigate a lot of that.
Yeah.
Historically, beer would have been, it wasn't if the beer was sour, it was how sour it was when you consumed it. But there's a lot of evidence kind of in the 1850s is the beginning of what we think of as like a more modern scientific brewing process. And they start to understand what was imparting flavor on the beer and how to get away from that. So we were comfortable trying to mitigate that and make most of our beers a little more approachable to the general public.
I don't find this really sour. You know, it has a little tartness to it, but
Sure.
but not the sours that people are trying to produce today in
Right.
modern brewing.
Yeah, I mean, I think everything that we do in America is in your face and intense. So American craft beer kind of has adopted Berliner Weisse style or Berliner style beers, Lambic from the Lambic tradition as well. Making sour beer in America has kind of become extreme, just like we have really hoppy IPAs and things like that, or really bitter IPAs. I think American brewers have kind of gone extreme with the Berliners at times. They can be really delicious, but not necessarily true to the original style. So that is our ginger pale ale. So kind of a British-inspired beer, but also one that comes from the kind of homestead brewing tradition in like maybe the 1830s, when you're throwing different botanicals into your beer if you didn't have enough hops on hand, for instance, or if you're using it as a kind of a health remedy. We find a lot of evidence that they're throwing spices and things into the beer for their
I'm feeling
medicinal
better.
benefit. Yeah, we can't legally say that it'll make you feel better, but yeah, there's about 25 pounds of ginger root in there for a 45-gallon batch.
But you definitely
20 to
get it
25
on the
pounds.
nose and on
Yeah.
the palate for sure.
And
So-
it's a real dry finish too.
Yeah, it's a barley-based beer, but we throw some honey in it right at the end, and that'll help dry it out a little bit. Do some we have some toasted barley in there, I think, toasted grain.
Would go well with some kung
It's
pao
got
beef.
it's got the
Yes, it
brown
would.
too.
Yeah,
You really would.
yeah.
Do you guys fill growlers here? Do you do those sorts of things?
Yeah, definitely. We have our own growlers in house, obviously, like every craft brewery does. But you're more than welcome to bring your own in. We'll do growler fills, howler fills. Yeah, anything that we make on tap, and we usually have at least 6 to 7 of our own on. As we've gotten better, I mean, it's a constant learning process.
Sure.
As we get better with being able to manage the system, learn how it operates, kind of get into that groove. When I first started, we were keeping, 4, maybe 5 on tap. Now we're up to 6 all the time, and then sometimes 7 or 8. So we have a cask ale program that we've started within the past, 6 months. We have been experimenting with pulling the porters and the Irish Reds off and letting them kind of carbonate naturally and see how that turns out. That way, again, the historical experience, we can say, look, these are forced carbonated beers. If you really want to get down and dirty with the history, this is what was going on. Try one of these.
Are there beers that every time I come in here I can expect to find? Do you have year-round things and then more experimental things, or do you have pretty much a set?
Like Dan said, we kind of always have at least 4 beers on tap, kind of 4 core beers. The 2 that are always available are our porter and our coriander ale. The coriander ale comes from, which you'll try here in a little bit, comes from an 1830s recipe, so almost a verbatim recipe from the historic record. The porter is from kind of 1850, 1860 era. So those are our kind of 2 mainstays. Everything else aside from that at one point was a seasonal, but we're lucky enough that the beer is popular enough that almost all of those stay on year round at this point. Beet beer, which is the bright pink one that you have up next on your flight board, is technically a seasonal. We brew it in February. That kind of pink color, we release it around Valentine's Day. Kind of fun. That one We don't ever usually intend to keep it through summer, but it's popular enough that we just brewed another batch of it last week, and we're brewing it today as well. So we'll kind of keep it, as long as people are drinking it, we'll keep them around.
And this is what again?
It's the beet ale. So
Beet ale,
it's,
okay.
It's
yeah.
beet. There are beets in here.
40 pounds of beets in it.
Yeah.
40 pounds of beets in
40
here.
pounds of beets. So it also has barley, wheat, and rye in equal parts. Some whole leaf hops. In this case, in that batch, we have some local hops that were grown by Little Miami Farms here in the Dayton area. So we try to get some local ingredients when we can. We hope to get the beets locally from the same guy who's growing those hops for this batch, but that crop didn't come in quite as expected this year. So we do one which is a true seasonal for us that's similar to this beer, which is a squash ale. So similar concept, barley based, but also has butternut squash added to it. And in that case, we do get that squash locally. So
I'm getting a little bit of spice. There's a little kind of a
Yeah.
spicy thing to this.
We fermented on a German wheat beer yeast, so you get the cloves, you get some of the banana spiciness from it. Yeah.
we actually do add a really tiny amount of like a half an ounce to the full batch of whole clove there too.
So different kind of yeast will yield different kind of flavors to the beer?
Yeah, yeast is incredibly important. Most people don't think about it. If you're not a brewer, most people don't realize how important yeast is to the flavor. You can make the exact same beer, like we could do 5 batches of coriander and ferment it on 5 different yeasts and get 5 different beers out of it. So some are more flocculent, which means you'll end up with a clearer beer. Your traditional wheat beer yeasts that give you those banana and clove aromas that you're used to when you open one of those up, whereas an American wheat beer yeast tends to be a little bit cleaner. American ales tend to be a little bit cleaner. A British ale yeast, which is what we use for the coriander and the porter, will have some more of those esters and phenols in there.
What was the word you used? Flocculent?
Flocculent, yeah, yes.
Write that down. That's a new one.
They clump.
Yeah. Basically means the yeast kind of clumps together and
So
settles
it's-
down at the bottom of the
Yeah.
fermenter, so you get a kind of more clear beer.
That is a term I've never heard before.
Yeah.
So. All right, this is.
So then we've got our coriander ale, which, like I said, is kind of a flagship beer. So that's a barley-based beer. According to the 1831 recipe, which came from a kind of a family or housewife manual. It was called Family Receipts, which was a word for recipe. Family Receipts for the husbandman and housewife. So it was this manual on how to raise a family. An entire chapter of that book was about brewing beer. So it shows you how important beer was historically.
The good old days.
Our tagline here at Carillon Brewing Company on a lot of our merchandise is cleaner than water. It was true. I mean, the beer was often the safer alternative to whatever water source you had, especially when the cities became industrialized. Waterways became contaminated, wells could be contaminated. Beer gets boiled during the brewing process, but the finished product is such that not much wants to live inside of it that can affect human health. So pH of the beer and the hopping level that you utilize will kind of change the profile of the beer.
This
so
is
that
really
it's
spicy
clean.
on the finish.
Yeah,
It's almost
so-
like there's chilies or something.
There
It's
is.
almost
Oh,
like
there
a,
is?
you,
Okay.
you think of it like it sounds like a modern craft beer recipe, American craft beer recipe, but it's from 1831, and they called for pale malted barley, cane sugar. So we have some cane sugar in there to heighten up the alcohol a little bit and dry it out a little. And then it called for coriander seed, so that's why we call it coriander ale. So you get a little bit of citrus note maybe from the coriander, and then chili pepper. In the recipe, it refers to it as capsica. So that's part of the challenge and why they wanted historians to do this, because when you go back and read these recipes, they're very vague. In this recipe, it says boil it to a color. Whatever that means. It meant something to whoever wrote that book, but we've lost that over the years. So hopefully we got the color right.
That's
but
like
we
a
do know,
skosh. Put a
right,
skosh in.
exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, this is really unique. I mean, initially it almost like a lager, but then as it sits on your palate, you get that a little bit of a burn.
Yeah.
And it's not a bad burn. It's just a unique,
Right.
very unique.
That's
finish.
probably our most popular beer. It's exactly for that reason. A lot of people will come in here and they'll be like, well, what do you have that's light? Well, here you go.
But it's a good example of beer that's light in color, and a lot of people think they only like light beer, but there's a lot of flavor in that beer. It's a pretty complex beer.
There's a huge flavor and complex flavoring. I would think that somebody who likes, and there's fair audience for kind of chili peppery kind of beers, and I bet you know, people would drive 50 miles to fill a growler with this.
Yeah,
I would
great.
think that like that beer.
Right. But I think like Randy was saying, it's not as in your face as some chili beers that I've had. We don't want any of our beers to be those kind of spices that are added to them, or were historically, weren't always for their flavor contribution. Kind of like the ginger pale ale, and in this case, we suspect that this was kind of a medicinal beer.
Yeah.
Chili pepper can kind of clear up your sinuses. It can actually aid in sore throats and things like that. So
It's all the way on the finish of it.
Right.
It isn't when it first hits your tongue. It's
No.
after you've swallowed it.
it's almost warming.
Yeah, and you
that's kind of
sit
how I
there.
think
You
of it.
sit there
Yeah.
for 3 or 4 seconds. You go, oh wow,
Right. Yep. Yeah.
it's interesting.
Sure.
All right, this is
That is our porter. So porter was arguably the most popular beer of the 1800s. Any decade you look at the history in Europe or in the Americas, porter there was some version of porter. It's changed over time. So sometimes porter was as light as a kind of an amber ale. We get them as dark as a really heavy kind of Baltic porter or something like that. Ours falls somewhere in the middle of that. It is quite dark in color, but it actually drinks fairly light.
It does. It drinks light, but you still get the coffee and
Right.
it's chocolatey
Right.
kind of.
And our porter has evolved over the time that we've started brewing it. When we first opened, we roast all of our grain in-house, like I mentioned earlier. So we get all of our grain malted, and then we take it from its kind of pale form, its dried form, and roast it to different degrees to get different color and flavor. The porter has, 5 of our roast levels in it?
Yeah,
so
it's
we
pretty
do-
much kind of like the here's what we do
Right.
beer in terms of the roasting.
Yeah, it's kind of the showcase of our hand-roasted grains. But when we first started, we were roasting everything in a 12-inch skillet right over the fire in the main fireplace. And that gives you a roasted grain, but it's very inconsistent. It can be kind of harsh at times, and it tells the story of that beer, when we were brewing it that way, told the story of porter from a specific time when they were doing that. Over time, right around the 1850s, they started to improve roasting technology, and that kind of revolutionized beer brewing and made beer brewing more consistent. Especially darker beers, you could have kind of a more even coffee-like or dark, unsweetened dark chocolate flavor from your roasted grain, rather than kind of a harsh, acidic, or kind of acrid flavor that you would get out of it if you had direct heat roasting. So one of our volunteers, we have 3 of us that are paid to do this, but we have about 13 volunteers that should get a lot of credit, that help us out every day, one of whom built a drum roaster for us. So that was kind of the big leap in technology.
Right.
From that kind of direct heat stuff that was harsh to getting a more even color. So this is our first batch.
This is the first batch with the drum roast.
First batch with
Oh,
the
is
drum
that
roast.
right?
Yeah, so you guys came at a good time. So
We're here at a historic moment.
Yes.
Yeah.
The thing I find so unique about this is that, as you travel around the country, you go to different brew pubs, and you look on their menu, and they have all these different things, which is nice. They do have some of their things that are there all the time, but I've never had 5 beers that are totally different that I've never experienced before.
yeah,
This is really unique, and it's really amazing to think, this, and it's, come down here and see beer, the historic beer that was made in the 1850s and 1860s. This is really unique. I
Yeah.
really like it.
yeah. I think a lot of people would assume when they think of 1850 that all the beer was really dark and muddy and kind of not all that appealing. But they were really sophisticated brewers even by the 1850s. They knew what they were doing, and they'd been, kind of passing the traditions down for a long time. And it was kind of the beginning of what we think of as modern beer. So kind of one foot in the kind of the alchemical, kind of magical, just make some sugar water and let it sit out and it turns into beer, to these guys using hydrometers, so they were measuring sugar and alcohol content. They had thermometers, so they were keeping accurate temperature. So they were making some consistent, repeatable beers by the 1850s, but also unique flavors. I think a lot of what American craft beer is doing right now is a whole lot closer to what they were doing in 1850 than it was for about 100 years in America, when it was just Budweiser and Miller and Coors making kind of flavorless pilsners.
Yep.
So.
I'm a darker beer drinker. That's that's what I would normally order when I sat down. This is unique, but it's good.
Yeah, thanks.
I'm
The one thing about the stout here is that I feel like I could drink 2 or 3 of them, where normally I'll drink one, and that's it.
Yeah.
It's just, the flavors just kind of overwhelm you after one, and you wouldn't
Right.
want to drink another one.
That's one of the things that we always, again, when people come in and they're asking if they're afraid of the dark beers, it's often because they've been handed in the past. Some friend has given them some super heavy,
Yeah.
try this. And,
Yeah.
it's basically a meal in a can, and not all beer was like that. And especially you go to England even today, and their porters are nowhere near as heavy or as alcoholic as the American versions of it. So it's nice to be able to say, look, historically, if you had a porter, it would have been a lighter body beer. You could have 2 or 3 of them. You're not going to feel like you got to go sit in the corner, and they still have that flavor, but it's not that, like you said, intense. You feel like you have to work for it flavor
Yeah.
type situation. You can sit, you can enjoy it.
What is the alcohol content here?
All of them range just like any modern beer. It just depends on the style. Our porter usually hovers around 5.5 to 6% alcohol. Coriander ale is a little bit stronger, usually around 6.5. That beet beer is upwards of the stronger end.
This is 6.5.
It's about 6.5, yeah.
I would never guess that.
The beet beer came in at 7.7. So
This
it's on
one?
the stronger side,
Yeah.
Yep. That has a lot of grain in it. It has 150 pounds of grain, which is on the upward end of what we can fit in our mash tun. And it also has 7 pounds of cane sugar added to it, so that'll amp it up a little bit too.
Wow. I would never guess.
Yeah.
I would never guess that was
Yep.
in the 7% range.
We don't really do extreme beers in terms of alcohol content.
Right.
The strongest one, aside from the beet that we do, is one that we brew once a year at this point, which is our spruce ale. So it's a beer that's brewed with barley, molasses, and actual spruce tips, the kind of new growth spruce. And that one usually comes in close to 8%.
Yeah.
So it can get on the stronger side. But that was kind of a special beer from a historic standpoint that you weren't drinking all the time.
Right.
It was a beer that was used as a vitamin C supplement. If you didn't have fresh produce available, usually in the wintertime or for military troops that are out on a patrol or a sea voyage, drinking spruce ale that was fortified with the alcohol kind of helped preserve it a little bit. But it also had the spruce tips, which have vitamin C, so kind of stave off scurvy.
Guys, I know you have to get to work. You've got fires that
Yeah,
are
I think we're
probably
supposed to
going
surround
out,
it, yeah.
even while we've drug you away from what you're supposed to be doing. But really appreciate the invite. This has been a unique experience, to say the
Great.
least.
Cool.
Like the beers, and thanks for the invite.
Thanks for having us.
And with
Cheers.
that, Texas Miss Lily, see you next time.